It was a quiet Wednesday morning, November 26th, 2025, one of those mornings when people in Abuja wake up, make tea, prepare their children for school, and try to believe that life is still normal. Yet beneath that calm surface, something far more unsettling was already in motion. A secret agreement had been signed thousands of miles away in Washington, and the Nigerian people were never told what was written in their name. For days, the government kept silent about their sudden trip to the United States. They never explained why the National Security Advisor met with the U.S. Department of War. They never revealed why a member of the U.S. House of Representatives, someone deeply involved in Nigeria's security file, had to be the one to go on Fox News and speak publicly about the real conditions America had handed to Nigeria. It wasn't the Nigerian government speaking, it was Washington. And that alone should worry every citizen. Because when a nation hides the truth about foreign demands, it's not hiding it from the terrorists, it's hiding it from the people. In this opening chapter of today's story, we step into a difficult but necessary conversation, one that many Nigerians may not be ready for, but absolutely deserve. What did the U.S. actually tell Nigeria behind closed doors? What agreements were signed? Why were Americans the first to reveal the conditions, while the Nigerian government avoided every question? And most importantly, what happens in the next 2 months when those conditions expire? If you care about security, sovereignty, and the future of West Africa, stay with me, because understanding this now may shape how you interpret every headline that will come in January and February. And before we go deeper, let me ask you, do you believe nations should be honest with their people about deals that affect millions of lives? If your answer is yes, then please stay until the end of this video. And if you value truth over silence, consider sharing this message so more people can see it. Long before the Nigerian public even knew something unusual had happened, the country's top security officials were already seated in a closed-room meeting inside a Washington building, one belonging not to the State Department, but to the U.S. Department of War. That detail alone spoke volumes. Nations do not visit the Department of War unless the conversations are difficult, serious, and heavy with consequences. And this particular meeting would reshape everything Nigeria believed about its own security. The Nigerian delegation, led by the National Security Advisor and joined by a small group of officials, arrived with the intention of seeking assistance against the worsening wave of terrorism at home. But what they received instead was an ultimatum, not a discussion, not a negotiation. An ultimatum. For days, the Nigerian government refused to brief the public about what was said. They returned home silently, without a press conference, without a national address, and without a single acknowledgement that a monumental demand had been placed upon them. Ironically, it wasn't a Nigerian official who first revealed what happened behind closed doors. It was a U.S. representative who went on Fox News and disclosed the conditions, almost as if to warn the Nigerian people themselves. So what exactly did America say? The first condition was surprisingly personal. The U.S. demanded the immediate release of Sunday Jackson, a man condemned to death in Nigeria under charges many consider politically motivated. Jackson, according to the video's narrator, was treated less as a suspect and more as a symbol, a warning to ordinary citizens that killing terrorists, even in self-defense, would not be tolerated. An American missionary who personally knew Jackson had spent months on Nigerian television urging the government to free him, insisting the world was watching. And Washington made it clear his release was non-negotiable. This is the first step, they reportedly said. The second condition was far more explosive. Nigeria must publish the list of individuals who sponsor terrorism within its borders. Not investigate them, not compile their names, but publish them openly for the world to see. This was the very list Nigerian officials once claimed they had completed years earlier, yet never released. In 3 years under President Tinubu, not a single financier of terror had been revealed to the Nigerian people, not one. According to the narrator, the reason was simple and deeply troubling. The list allegedly included people at the highest levels of government, individuals whose exposure could shatter the nation's political landscape. If the list were published, the world would no longer speculate about internal collusion. It would become official, documented, irrefutable. And then came the third condition. The most severe of all, Nigeria must disarm every major terrorist group within 2 months. 2 months to dismantle networks that have operated for years. 2 months to neutralize militants wielding heavy machine guns, armored vehicles, and explosives. 2 months to achieve what the Nigerian military itself has repeatedly failed to accomplish: Washington added a chilling warning: if you cannot disarm them within 2 months, we will. It was not a threat hidden in diplomatic language. It was a direct statement of intent and acknowledgement that the United States had already mapped the problem, identified the actors, and developed its own disarmament plan for Nigerian soil. The Nigerian delegation was reportedly instructed to return home and immediately publish the names of terror sponsors because without transparency, disarmament would be impossible. But after returning to Abuja, the government said nothing, not a word. No names were released. No explanation was offered, and certainly no public debate was allowed. Meanwhile, the narrator insists Nigeria signed multiple pages of documents acknowledging these conditions, documents that remain hidden from the public. They ought to make the documents public, he says, but they won't. And so Nigeria finds itself in a silent countdown, one that most citizens don't even realize has begun 2 months to do what its leaders may not be capable or willing to do. As the days passed after Nigeria's silent return from Washington, the tension began to thicken in the air, an invisible pressure that ordinary citizens could not name, but those watching closely could feel. For the narrator of the original video, this moment marked the beginning of a dangerous countdown. He claimed that by early 2026, long before any official announcement from either Abuja or Washington, violence would escalate to levels the country had never witnessed. And he insisted that this escalation was not accidental. It was part of a coming storm that had been visible to those who were watching the signs. The crescendo of fear grew when he declared almost with certainty, Nigeria is surrounded. Everyone is surrounded. By who, by what? He did not say directly, but the implication was clear. The forces preparing for confrontation were no longer limited to ragtag insurgents hiding in the forest. These were actors with resources, intelligence, and international connections, the kind of actors who don't wait for permission to reshape a region's future. And according to him, Washington already knew everything, every camp, every crossing point, every telegram channel, every flow of money and weapons. America has data that Nigeria does not have, he said. They know what is about to happen even before the attacks increase. He described a surveillance system so advanced that the U.S. could track militant movements in real time, while Nigerian security agencies struggled to locate even a single financier of terrorism. Then came the emotional peak of the video. The explosive interview aired on Channels Television, where a respected lawyer and rights activist delivered one of the most scathing assessments of Nigeria's leadership in recent memory. His voice carried the frustration of millions. He repeated one by one the long list of institutions Nigeria already has: a fully developed Terrorism Prevention Act, penal codes across northern states, a national police force, the State Security Service, Civil Defense Corps, the Air Force, the Navy, the Army, a Ministry of Justice, state prosecutors, high courts, and federal courts with terrorism jurisdiction. Then he paused and delivered the line that shook viewers across the country. The problem is not capacity. The problem is that either terrorists or terrorist sympathizers are the ones fighting terrorism. He argued that the Nigerian state had lost what political scientists call the monopoly of violence, the primary requirement for a functioning nation. In plain language, the government no longer controlled force within its borders. Armed groups, he said, were acting with the freedom of private armies, often with better equipment and more predictable funding than the legitimate security forces. As his voice rose, he described the senselessness of the non-kinetic strategy, a policy that promoted negotiation and appeasement rather than decisive action. He referenced Kaduna as an example where officials claimed dialogue had reduced attacks, yet fresh killings continued even under the new governor. He pointed out how a former governor openly accused a sitting governor of paying 1 billion naira to terrorists, an allegation no one had meaningfully challenged. And then he delivered the statement that became the centerpiece of the entire interview. Today you have a commander-in-chief who is not even commanding Boy Scouts. It was both an insult and a warning, a declaration that Nigeria's leadership no longer commanded respect, fear, or authority in the eyes of the country's enemies. He reinforced his point with example after example: terrorists boasting openly on TikTok, security agencies tracking citizens who criticize the president, yet failing to track kidnappers, military officers communicating with terrorists to plead for the release of hostages. Governors seen dining with militants. A general murdered, his phone seized, and the intelligence on it instantly compromised. This, he argued, was not incompetence. It was complicity, or at the very least a collapse of political will so severe that the distinction no longer mattered. The climax of this section arrived when he was asked whether Nigeria now fit the definition of a failed state. His answer was measured but devastating. If we cannot agree that the state has failed, we must agree that it is failing and failing at an accelerated rate. At this moment, the reactions of experts, activists, and ordinary citizens converged into one undeniable conclusion. Something catastrophic was unfolding. The government was not prepared, and the world, especially the United States, was watching closely. When national institutions begin to erode, the first people to feel the collapse are never the politicians sitting behind guarded gates. They are the ordinary citizens who must walk unprotected through the streets. In Nigeria, the consequences of years of quiet decay have now become painfully visible. You can see it in the faces of villagers who no longer sleep at night, in the silence of parents who fear letting their children walk to school, and in the empty farms abandoned because dusk has become a time of danger rather than rest. One of the most haunting outcomes of this crisis is the explosion of internally displaced persons, millions pushed from their homes, living in makeshift camps with no running water, no protection, and no hope of returning. These camps were meant to be temporary shelters. Today, some families have lived in them for nearly a decade. No one asks for dialogue with these victims. No one offers negotiations to the mothers who lost sons or the children who watched their fathers dragged into the forest. While the government speaks of non-kinetic strategies, the very people suffering the consequences of violence remain invisible in policy discussions and utterly forgotten. The political consequences are equally severe. A nation's stability depends on trust in its commanders, in its courts, and in the belief that laws can protect the innocent. But Nigeria's citizens listen as governors accuse each other of paying terrorists. They watch as military operations mysteriously fail, even when intelligence reports say the coordinates of kidnappers were known. They see courts fully equipped to handle terrorism cases, yet almost no prosecutions ever reach a conclusion. The message this sends to the public is devastating. The system is not broken, it is compromised. The killing of General Uba stands as a symbol of this breakdown. A high-ranking officer ambushed and executed his phone taken by insurgents, a single moment that wiped out untold amounts of military intelligence. The soldiers who serve under him now walk into battle knowing that if one of their own falls, those responsible may never face justice. What does that do to morale? What does it do to the will to fight? When soldiers believe their leaders cannot or will not protect them, the entire security apparatus begins to rot from within. Politically, the situation is just as alarming. The president's failure to visit victims of major attacks sends a message of detachment. Instead of standing with citizens in mourning, the administration seems more focused on welcoming defecting governors, celebrating party victories, and spreading optimistic talking points that no longer match the country's reality. Even when the president ordered police officers to be withdrawn from VIP convoys to reinforce national security, citizens reported seeing the same long motorcades with the same heavily armed escorts. His orders, critics say, carry no weight. They are meaningless, as the lawyer in the interview put it, words that do not move men, policies that do not shift outcomes. And this brings us to the heart of Nigeria's political collapse, the disappearance of political will. The nation has laws, it has prosecutors, it has courts, it has soldiers. What it lacks is a leadership willing to draw a clear line between the state and the groups tearing the country apart. When criminals see that negotiations, secret payments, and political protection are more common than prosecutions, they expand. When terrorists notice that they can post videos on TikTok without being hunted down, they grow bolder. When villains understand that the government is more likely to appease them than confront them, the nation slides toward paralysis. These are not abstract theories. These are the daily consequences carried by fathers, mothers, refugees, soldiers, and communities across the country. Nigeria's political crisis is not merely a failure of structure, it is a failure of courage. From the outside looking in, the crisis unfolding inside Nigeria is not just a domestic tragedy, it is a regional fault line with global implications. And few understand this more clearly than the United States. To American intelligence agencies, Nigeria is not simply a large African nation with internal problems. It is the anchor of West Africa, a critical energy hub, and a population giant whose collapse would shake an entire region. Washington has watched the spread of armed groups across the Sahel from Mali to Niger to northern Nigeria, and they know something that many Nigerians do not. Once terrorism reaches a certain scale, it does not stay contained. It spills across borders, across markets, across alliances. This is why America's tone in their meeting was not polite diplomacy, it was urgency. The U.S. has learned painful lessons from Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, and Somalia. They know what happens when armed groups gain heavy weaponry, safe corridors, and local political protectors. They have seen what happens when governments lose control of violence. And in Nigeria, they now see all the warning signs at once. From Washington's perspective, the most alarming detail is not the number of attacks. It is the silence, the refusal to publish the names of terror financiers. The failure to prosecute even a single high-profile sponsor, the inconsistencies in the government's own narrative. To American analysts, silence does not signal stability, it signals infiltration. When a government cannot identify its enemies, it often means the enemy is sitting at the table. But America is not alone in its concern. European nations have quietly raised alarms as well. For years, Europe has tracked migration patterns, monitoring how conflict zones produce waves of displacement. If Nigeria were to collapse into full-scale war, the resulting humanitarian shock could reach Italy, Greece, Spain, and France within months. Millions displaced inside Nigeria could push into Niger, Chad, Cameroon, and Benin countries already struggling with their own fragility. From Europe's vantage point, Nigeria represents not just a security threat, but a potential demographic earthquake. Within Africa itself, Nigeria's neighbors are watching with a mix of fear and frustration. Many remember how Boko Haram once spread across Lake Chad, overwhelming borders and exposing the weakness of regional coordination. Today, several of those same neighboring states, especially within the new Sahel alliances, are asking a difficult question. If Nigeria, with one of the largest armies on the continent, cannot control its territory, what chance do smaller nations have? This is also why America's 2-month ultimatum carries such weight. It is not merely a demand, it is a test. A test of whether Nigeria is capable of governing itself, a test of whether the region can depend on Abuja, and a test of whether the world should prepare for a more direct intervention in West Africa. To Washington, this is not about pride or punishment. It is about preventing a collapse that could redraw the security map of the continent. In the end, the American view is clear. If Nigeria chooses transparency and decisive action, the world will stand with it. If Nigeria chooses silence, the world will act without it. And beneath the surface of this geopolitical analysis lies a human truth. Many older American viewers understand deeply when a nation refuses to confront the forces that threaten its people, those forces will eventually confront the world. As we reach the end of this difficult story, one truth becomes impossible to ignore. Nigeria is standing at a crossroads that will determine not only its own future, but the stability of an entire region. The 2-month ultimatum handed down in Washington is not just another diplomatic request, it is a countdown, a pressure point, a warning to a government that has allowed silence, confusion, and internal compromise to replace duty and transparency. And the world is watching quietly, carefully, but with growing concern. For ordinary Nigerians, the fear is no longer abstract. Families have buried loved ones without justice. Millions live in IDP camps with no promise of return. Soldiers fight with courage but little direction. Communities once filled with laughter now carry the sound of distant gunfire. And all the while, those elected to protect the people speak in circles, avoid hard truths, and pretend that peace is something that can be negotiated with men who post their crimes on TikTok. The warning signs are all around us. When a nation refuses to name the financiers of terror, when courts remain idle while killers walk free, when intelligence leaks from the highest levels, when militants grow more confident than the police, the slope becomes steep and the fall becomes swift. If Nigeria does not act with courage, others will act in its place. And history shows us that when foreign powers intervene, no matter their intentions, the consequences reshape generations. This is why the story matters not only for Nigeria, but for the entire African continent. Leaders like President Ibrahim Traore in Burkina Faso are pushing a different model of security, one rooted in transparency, discipline, and national responsibility. Whether you agree with him or not, his message resonates across Africa news cycles because people are desperate for leaders who will confront danger rather than negotiate with it. The question now is whether Nigeria's leadership is willing to do the same, or whether the burden will fall to outsiders. And so I leave you with this. Do you believe that Nigeria still has the political will to protect its own people? Or has the situation reached a point where outside intervention is inevitable? More importantly, what kind of future do you want for West Africa, a future shaped by African choices or a future forced by foreign pressure? Your voice matters. Your perspective matters. If you feel that you are among the few who understand how serious this moment is, please share this video so others can see what is coming. And if you believe, as I do, that truth should never be hidden behind closed doors, then subscribe so together we can keep asking the questions that powerful people hope you never ask.